Hello everyone, welcome to another DC miniature game battle report, the second for the channel, and we're playing it on the board that we've been using for the last couple of Batman miniature game battle reports, so it might be familiar. We're going to be doing scenario 2 from the rulebook, but we'll take a look at that in a second, once we've had a look at the hero team and the villain team going at each other today. So here's the 4 model hero team, 50 power level, although I don't think it comes to 50 on the dot, I think it was 48 or 49. We've got a new addition, Shazam, at the front there. We also have the Ezra Miller Flash, and then we have at the back, the largest model, we have the 80th anniversary multiverse Batman. He is eventually going to be in the Batman miniature game as well, but he is being shown off here. He's more expensive than the average Batman. He has some very interesting rules. He isn't coming in from the start. He comes in whenever you feel like, and starts base to base with enemies. Then we also have a strange Superman. This is the black suit Superman from when he comes back after dying to Doomsday, because it felt apt after what happened in the first battle report. So the way this Superman works is he's much cheaper than your standard Superman, but he also starts weak. And then from the second turn onwards he starts regaining his powers until turn 5, I think he's back to full power, so the penultimate turn. And he has guns. This Superman uses guns because he doesn't have all his superpowers. So that's what we're going to do. So that is the hero team, only 4 models. Let's go take a look at the villains. And in the villain team we've got 5 models, mostly made up of the Dark Knights. We have the Merciless, the Red Death and the Drowned, and then they're backed up by Clayface and Killer Croc, who relatively speaking in this game compared to the compared to the Batman miniature game, they're not as powerful. They're cheap and cheerful. I think 7 and 8 power pair, and then all the evil bat people were roughly, I think they're all 11. So balances out roughly speaking. We are going to go with the, actually I think the Red Death is slightly cheaper. Either way, this is the villain team. We're going to go take a look at the scenario now. So scenario 2 in the hardback rulebook is Spoils of War. There's 2 10x10 deployment areas for each side, so they'll have to split their models between the two as evenly as possible. And it's kind of similar to the first scenario. Basically there is, as I accidentally almost dropped the camera, there is, let's see, 4 objectives. It goes to 6 turns. Each objective can be placed anywhere, but there has to be at least one objective within 6 inches of each of the 4 deployment zones, so basically that just means there's not going to be any in the middle. And then for victory points, 1 victory point for each objective held, and you hold an objective if you have the most models within 4 inches of it. And then also a bonus victory point to whoever has the majority at the end of a turn. No victory points to be gained here for any form of incapacitation, so killing will only happen as a means to defend an objective. Right, we'll be back with the deployment and everything set up, ready to go. So we're at deployment, and the hero sides are down here in the 10x10 box. Superman and the Flash are at the door to the XXX bar, don't ask any questions. Their objective that has to be deployed within 6 was put there. Shazam's up here on the roof, and his objective that had to be within 6 of this 6 inches of this 10x10 is right there. Batman isn't on the board. He can come down at any point where the hero side can activate, and then we'll go over his I'm Batman rule when it comes to that. Merciless and Red Death are over there with their objective right in front of them. And then the Drowned, Clayface and Killer Croc right up to the edge of their 10x10, and the objective is within 6. I don't think it said it had to be exactly 6, I think it was within 6, we'll check that anyway. But first, let's see who's going to be getting first activation in battle round 1. It's going to be blue dice for heroes, red dice for villains. Red dice. Okay. The Merciless activated. He used 2 power to go his full allocated movement, which is 8 inches, which put him past the objective, but he's still claiming it. Remember, it's number of models within 4 inches that count as claiming. So he technically could have gone a bit further if he had the movement, but he didn't. It was just enough to get to there. He didn't have any, well, he has a forward kind of fan-shaped attack, but that's not enough to reach anybody over here. So instead he's banking his power, and also at the start of his activation he has to pick what buff he gets from the Helmet of Ares. This turn he has picked +2 to all defences, so he is in a defensive stance essentially, but he can actually still go into an actual defensive stance to buff it further. So he is very tanky at the moment. So the first activation for the heroes was Shazam, and he can actually fly surprisingly far, like much further than most other characters with fly, who I think max out at 13. He can move 16. So he flew down to where you see him right here. He is within 4 of the enemy objective, so he is contesting that, although obviously they have more here, and he's just kind of ignored the hero objective back there. But he got this close, so he could use his once per game power of Shazam on Clayface. It's supernatural damage, so he couldn't buff his defense, and he has low defense against it. so it just does a straight 4 damage. Then it has Explosion 5, so everything within 5 inches has to do an agility roll, or they take, well, they take full damage if they fail the agility roll. If they pass the agility roll, they take half damage rounding down. So actually there should be another 2 there, forgot to put that on there. But anyway, Clayface took 4 damage. Killer Croc did not pass his agility roll, so he took 4 damage. The Drowned passed her roll, so she actually took 2 damage, but forgot to put the dice there to indicate it. So that was his once per game super massive attack. He spent every last bit of power he had. He starts with 8 power while he's healthy, he also gets +1, so he's actually at 9. He overpowered the attack to make sure it landed. It was probably worth it, that was a lot of damage. Killer Croc activated next. He spent 2 power to charge into Shazam, and then he spent his remaining 6, I believe, 5 for his once per game Devastating Claws +1 to empower it. It's physical damage. I think Shazam has default physical resistance 15 plus resistance 1 for 16. He couldn't buff his defense because he has no power left. Doesn't matter though, because on 3d8s, Killer Croc rolled 221. So he could not get through Shazam's physical defense. He is stuck there, also without any power. Did nothing with his once per game attack, which is rather devastating. However, he is obviously within range of this, so currently it's a draw for how many models are within that, because I think Clayface is just out of range. Actually no, he might be within range, so the villains might hold that one. But anyway, back over to the villains side now to see what happens. And by villains, I meant heroes. Heroes. Black Suit Superman activated. He moved around the corner to hold the objective there. He then overpowered his guns and shot into the Merciless. You can choose, because it has overload +3 damage or +2 damage on his guns, to do that instead. But because Merciless's energy defense is so high right now, just opted to take the extra d8, because it had to be 18 on 3d8 +6, because his attack power is pretty low to start with. He actually did manage to penetrate the defenses, so Merciless took 2 damage. Until he powers up, he's only allowed to use his guns, which is a once per activation thing, or super punch as much as he wants, but his super punch only does 1 damage. So he obviously can't do that from this range, so that's all Superman can do. He has banked 3 power to potentially use to defend himself. The Drowned activated next, started over there, moved her 8 over here, then used Dread Water, which is a cone, although presumably you are allowed to position the cone however you like off of her. So she made it so it didn't touch Croc. It was supernatural. Shazam actually has good supernatural defense, but it still managed to get through to him for 2 damage. She empowered it to do the 3d8 to try and guarantee it, and it worked. The Drowned ended her turn on 3 power remaining. Multiverse Batman has made his presence known, so let's go over his rules. His rule is I'm Batman, and that just means he doesn't start on the table, and then at any point where you could activate one of your own miniatures, you can activate him instead. You can place him anywhere in the game board as long as his base fits, so he opted to deploy between Killer Croc and the Drowned. Any enemy model, specifically says enemy, within 2 inches takes 1 damage, so Croc took 1 damage, the Drowned took 1 damage. Also, the cost of all his attacks gets reduced by 1, and he ignores defensive improvements as well for the turn. So he unleashed Sneak Attack on the Drowned, which is his once per game super big hit. Did another 4 damage to her. She buffed her defense when she couldn't, or that was a waste of power because he ignores that. Either way, he then used Reinforced Gloves twice in a row. You can use them as many times as you want, and because it was cheap, you could do it twice. But neither of them got through just from bad rolling on the d8s. But still, 5 damage to the Drowned, another additional 1 damage to Killer Croc. Also now that's helping contest that, although I think the villains are still going to take that objective. Either way, good damage. Back over to the villains. The Red Death activated next and sped up the board right into Superman's face and unleashed his once per game super mass critical punch, or whatever it's called. So this Superman doesn't have fantastic defense, but it didn't matter because the 2d8s were a 3 and a 1, nowhere close to getting through I think the 15 default resistance he has for now. So he has 1 power left, but he wasn't able to do any damage, and that's his once per game attack used up for nothing. Barry activated, and he didn't do much with his turn. He just moved his full 15 allocated movement to that objective over there, banked the rest of his power because his maximum reach is 4 inches, so he couldn't even reach Croc. So now it's over to Clayface to end off the villain turn. So to see off the battle round, Clayface activated, charged into the back of Batman. He used his once per game malleable clay and missed with some very bad d8 rolls, and then just used his remaining power, because there's no one else that can hurt him, to do metamorphic weapon, which is just like his bog standard smacking attack that you can spam. Also rolled very badly on the d8s, so wouldn't come close to getting through his default resistance to physical damage. So we'll be back with the recap of the points tallied in Battle Round 1, and remember, it's not down to who was wounded, it's purely objectives. So as we round up Battle Round 1, just going to point out something missed. Killer Croc has the Infiltrator role, so he didn't necessarily need to start in deployment, but he was right outside an objective anyway and moved into it, so it might not have mattered, but there you go, just for covering that. So anyway, as we were saying, it's just an objective game here, so for the heroes, Barry is holding this one for 1, but Superman is contested over here, so that's a draw, so nobody claims that one. Over here, the villains have the advantage, so they claim that one, and the Merciless claims this one over here. So 2 objectives held by the villains, 1 held by the heroes, means that the villains also get a bonus objective for having the majority. So it's 3-1 as we go into Battle Round 2, and we're going to have to see, as I noticed that the bag dropped, who is going to be going first in Battle Round 2. Shake the bag, and it's going to be the heroes this time. So as we cover the first activation of Battle Round 2, just forgot to mention that Clayface has Regeneration 2, so he's healed for 2. And despite having Regeneration in the Batman miniature game, the Drowned does not have it in this. The Red Death does, and in the Batman game he doesn't, so she could not heal anything. Anyway, the Multiverse Batman activated, you can see him over there, he's got 2 power remaining. There. But prior to that, he obviously activated here. Let's see what he do. He used the Most Dangerous Man on Earth rule, which can do a bunch of different stuff, but he opted to make it use on Croc. He is -2 to physical defense, just to help him be easier to get taken down by Shazam. He then used Reinforced Gloves on the Drowned, but failed. She buffed her physical defense, so she's 1 power down. And then he used his Batclaw, which unlike other Batmen, which is a once per game thing, he can actually just use it once per turn, to displace up to 12. He displaced over there, so he's still within 4, but thanks to the size of his base, it's a little bit awkward to attack him from multiple angles, because it's quite far to get around that end of things. Over to the villains for their first activation. The Drowned activated for the villains did Dread Water Manipulation again, or whatever it's called, with the fan-shaped water attack on Shazam. Did 2 damage and also did Distract 1 on him, which just means he's -1 physical defense. She then moved up into him, just spending 1 counter to move the 4 inches max, and did 2 Trident Pokes for 2 power each, hoping to take advantage of his lower physical defense, but rolled poorly and was not able to get through it. So it did a bit of damage to him. I think that's 4 damage in total on Shazam now. Back over to the heroes. Shazam activated next for the heroes and started by activating Healing Lightning, because apparently lightning that heals you is a thing, for 3 power, so he healed himself for 2 endurance, which is basically just negating the last bit of damage the Drowned did to him. He then overloaded Hercules Punch and used it on the Drowned. It was a mistake for Batman not to reduce the physical resistance of the Drowned, considering everyone's going against her, because she's actually very close to her pale zone in her HP bar, and she doesn't have regen, as it turns out, as we said earlier, unlike in the Batman game. So it would have been smarter to do that. Either way, he tried to Hercules Punch. Hercules Punch is actually supernatural, and the Drowned has pretty good supernatural defense. Should have went with Killer Croc on that, now that I think about it. Either way, the attack did nothing, so he then fell back just by spending 1 power, so that he is within claiming distance of the objective back here, since the enemy still have the majority over there, and he's left himself on 1 power just in case he needs to defend himself. Killer Croc activated next and chased after Shazam unleashed, that's the word I was looking for, a empowered feral attack, but did not manage to get through his defense. He buffed his physical defense. He then just tried to bite with the remainder of his power, and that also was not able to hurt Shazam, so he held up against the blows. That's Killer Croc's turn done. He is within 4 of that objective, also just pointing out the Drowned is just barely within 4 of that, so that's still villain majority on that one, even with Batman over there. Superman activated next, and this turn he has regained his power of flight, although he didn't make use of it. In point blank, he unleashed a Super Punch. Now, his Super Punch normally does 1 damage, but if he chooses to overload it and not take an extra D8 to try and get the hit through, it does +2 or +3 damage. The Red Death buffed physical defense to help try and avoid that happening, so spent 1 power. His first overpowered Super Punch did not get through. He then just had enough power left to fling 1 more bog standard Super Punch without any empowering. It of course did get through with a fantastic roll, so it only did 1 damage. He then spent his final remaining power to fall back a little bit, still within distance to be contesting that objective there, but hoping that the Merciless is just kind of forced to stand back there, because the Merciless is probably more dangerous than the Red Death. The Red Death activated next, and he has a rule called Agile, or a trait rather, which actually the Flash does as well, which is a rule we missed in the first battle report, apologies for that. It's a speedster related rule. It seems like it just means that they can actually do 2 movement actions within a given turn. So the Red Death spent 1 power just to chase down Superman. He charged him, overpowering it, but it didn't get through. He then just used his combo punch, which he also empowered. That did get through and did 2 damage to Superman. He then was able to use his agile trait to do another movement action and has fallen back to the objective over there because he wants to tag in the Merciless for fighting Superman. It was the Flash's turn next, so he just moved up 1, costing 1 power, into base to base with Killer Croc, to also kind of block the way a little bit as well. He used his once per game Supermass critical punch that the Red Death's already burned through. He overpowered it. He did 4 damage through to Croc, who is rocking some minus physical defense, remember. He then attempted a charge, which failed, and then just a normal kinetic burst, which also failed. He used up all his power as well, and speedsters have a rule called Too Tired, where if they have no power remaining, they are -1 to all defences. It shouldn't matter because only Clayface hasn't gone and he probably wants to stay within 4 of that, but that's just something to keep in mind as well. Also, Killer Croc is 1 more damage away from going into his pale zone. The Merciless activated next and he moved up as best he can. He unleashed his once per game attack that's called Devastation. He also picked a +2 attack as his buff this turn. However, he rolled very badly on his 3 dice because he empowered it as well. It's a spray attack, sorry. I think I referred to it as an expansive wave attack when we were just talking about it in the first turn. It's not. Expansive wave is like aura around the person. Spray is like the flamer template. So he used it, but he wasn't able to get it. He has Close Combat Master, which would normally allow a reroll on a melee hit die. Even though he's using a sword, it still counts as a spray attack still counts as a ranged attack. So my understanding is that Close Combat Master would not apply, so that's the way we're playing it. So Superman is unharmed and he didn't have any power left to do anything else. So Clayface's activation is ending off Battle Round 2, but we noticed a slight error in that Clayface in this game has Impersonation as a constant passive, where he counts as being invisible until he attacks or grabs a target. So Shazam should not have been able to target him with his big blast at the start of the game. Now, that said and done, it's a 5-inch explosion if the power of Shazam goes off, and he was point blank, or next to Killer Croc and the Drowned right here at the start of the game. So if he had targeted Killer Croc or the Drowned instead, Clayface still would have been caught in the blast, and I believe the invisibility skill does not protect him from the blast radius. So it doesn't seem like it's changed anything, but it was an error. He shouldn't have been targeted as the main target of the hit. He's going to be back to full health after this turn anyway, thanks to Regeneration 2, so again, it didn't make a difference in particular. But anyway, he moved up. He wants to be within distance of here and kind of blocking it as well, so he couldn't go very far. He then used a Clay Spike, which is his 1 ranged attack. He smacked it at Shazam and it got through. Did 2 damage to Shazam. So we're back with the recap for this turn. So at the end of Battle Round 2, Clayface has indeed regenerated back up to full health, hopefully overwriting anything done incorrectly earlier. With the objectives, the one up here is held by the Red Death, the one down here is contested with 1 model each. This objective is held by 2 heroes, right there, and this objective has majority 2 villains. Well actually, yeah, 2. Clayface and the Drowned are within range. Again, she is barely within range, and Batman over there, which means 1 victory point to the heroes, 2 victory points to the villains, plus an extra victory point to the villains for having the majority again. So the heroes, despite doing a ton of damage, they're losing. So let's see who is going to take first activation in Battle Round 3. It is going to be the villains. To get Battle Round 3 started, the Merciless activated, hoping to do some more damage to Superman before he gets action. This turn, Superman is allowed to use the rest of his attacks. So his once per game, his, what else does he have? Heat vision and stuff like that, so he's a bit more dangerous. Anyway, the Merciless picked +2 attack again, just to try and get hits through. He moved into base to base, not point to point, with Superman. He then used 2 sword attacks. He empowered them, although I need to keep forgetting, or need to keep remembering rather, don't call it empowering, it's overloading. I should use the correct term, but I've got empower instead of that stuck in my head. But the correct game term when you spend an extra power to roll an extra dice or do a special trait is overload. So he overloaded his 2 sword attacks. 1 got through for 2 damage on Superman. That does not put him in his pale zone yet, he's still got quite a bit of health left. He left himself with 1 power left to buff his defense as required. Shazam activated next, and you might notice that there's a mission from the game table. That's because he backed up a little bit and decided to throw the 3-story central building. Because it was so wide, it kind of was a detriment, because it had, well, even though it does 7 damage, it has to be distributed amongst everything caught in the throw. He picked it up, he opted to throw it roughly there. So, distributed damage, a couple of bits of scenery got destroyed by 1 bit of damage each. Batman had to have 1 associated with him. 1 on Clayface, 1 on Killer Croc, and 2 on the Drowned. They have to make an agility roll or take damage and get knocked down. Batman passed his, the Drowned passed hers. Killer Croc and Clayface both failed theirs, so they both took a damage and have been knocked down. Was that worth chucking a massive building for most of his power? No. It would have been better if Batman had been out of the way and there wasn't enough intervening scenery. Everything was a bit tightly packed, so it was a bit harder to make it work for him. He did also use his healing lightning again to heal too. He then threw a Zeus lightning bolt at the Drowned and missed. Killer Croc activated and took advantage of there not being a building there anymore. He paid to have power to stand up, because that's what you've got to do if you're knocked down, otherwise you count as -2 to all your defences. He spent another power to move around behind Shazam. He fairly bit him for 2 damage. He then just tried to do a cheeky claw attack to end his turn with the rest of his remaining power and failed. Oh, as an addendum, just very quickly, as a result of being hit by that building, Killer Croc is in his pale zone of his HP, so at the end of the battle round, he has to do a check to see whether or not he falls unconscious. He gives in to his wounds. Superman activated, and he has access to all his skills now, so he used his once per game Super Breath, but the Merciless spent his 1 remaining power to strengthen himself against energy attacks, so it didn't get through. Failing that, he then used 3 power to empower his guns. Now, just a note, his guns have a maximum range, however they do not have the ranged icon. So either that is a misprint, or that means he can shoot them in base to base. So it very specifically does not have the ranged icon, so I believe that's what that means. So he overpowered his guns, not to get an extra die, but to get the +2 bonus damage, or +3 bonus damage, however much it is. I think it was 2, because his default is 2. And that did get through, despite his buffed energy defense. So 4 damage to the Merciless, which isn't bad. Then he stayed put, with 1 power remaining. The Drowned activated next and used her Dark Water on Batman at range and did nothing. She then moved up, had to spend 2 to get into base to base, and then unleashed a Trident attack, which did get through. He didn't bother spending any power to buff his defense rather, so Batman took 2 damage, and that's it. Multiverse Batman activated next, but also just another thing we got wrong. You know, the game is still new to us here, so we are going to have emissions and whatnot. Clayface is actually immune to physical damage, so he is not knocked down because the damage done by thrown scenery is physical, so therefore he took no damage, he's back to full health, full power, not knocked down, etc. Just caught it early enough that it didn't matter. Everything he's been hit by so far, the kinetic blast or whatever, and from Shazam is not physical, so all that damage that he then just healed anyway was done correctly. Anyway, Batman just opted to stand still and just kept on unleashing overloaded reinforced glove. I remembered the word. Overloaded reinforced glove attacks on the Drowned, and managed to do 4 damage in total. She is in her pale zone now, so she will also be doing a knockout check at the end of the round. Clayface activated next. He fired some clay spikes at Batman, then moved up and just hit with his metamorphic weapon, leaving himself on 1 power, all said and done, and 0 damage done to Batman. He was able just to avoid all the damage. So we're just going to quickly cover the final 2 activations of Battle Round 3. Barry activated, fired Kinetic Lightning at Croc for 2 damage, then he moved in and unleashed his charge and then a punch, for a total of, all said and done, 5 damage. That puts Croc 1 away from the blue zone of his health bar, the worst part to be. So he's getting close to being defeated, and also having to do a knockout check at the start of every activation of his. Then the Red Death just had to activate to end the turn, but remember, this is about capturing objectives and the villains are way ahead, so the smartest thing for him to do is just to stay put. So he did. So then Battle Round 3, the halfway point of the battle, neither the Drowned or Killer Croc succumbed to their wounds and they stayed conscious. You have to roll 2 d8s and get equal to or lower than your stamina stat, and they did. And in terms of victory points, it was the exact same story again. The villains hold 2, the heroes hold 1 because the other is contested. So the villains get 2 plus the bonus 1 for having the majority. They are maybe insurmountably in the lead now, although as soon as they lose someone, the heroes can start coming back. Will it be enough without kill points contributing to the game? Probably not, but going first in Battle Round 4, taking turns, it's the heroes. Shazam took first activation in battle round 4 and he stayed where he was. He unleashed 2 Hercules punches on Killer Croc, overloading one of them for +1 damage. The other one he just wanted the 3 dice to try and guarantee the kill. He did. The first punch did 4 damage in total, the second one did 3. Killer Croc had 5 HP left. He is removed as a casualty. Then with his last power, Shazam has moved up to that objective over there. He's got nothing left. The Merciless activated next, and his turn was just 4 sword attacks on Superman, only one of which got through for 2 damage. Superman boosted his physical resistance to help try and deny it. We did have a rules query while working this out, because the Merciless has a rule called War, because he's the god of war, which is kind of like the murderer rule or the butcher rule from the Batman miniature game, where it says he can't perform an action which results in scoring a victory point. He can only score victory points from incapacitating miniatures. That's a very complicated rule in this scenario, because just standing near an objective is what gets a victory point for the team. It's not him precisely doing something, he's not manipulating the objective, he's not claiming it in that manner. So we think it still counts, but the other part of that is if he does manage to take out Superman, for instance, does he get the victory point? It's specific. I'll read it out in full. Hang on, where is it? Here it is. This model cannot perform actions that score victory points. This model can only score victory points from incapacitating models, which grants 1 extra. So if it's granting 0, he would get 1, I guess. But I think, because if you take that in exceptionally literal terms, he could never walk within 4 inches of an objective, because then he's doing something that counts as a victory point gaining condition. It's a very poorly written rule. We're playing it as, because he didn't spend power to like switch on an objective or something like that, because some of the scenarios do that, him just being near one and it generating a point as a result, or contesting as a result, it counts. Also, if he does take out someone, he'll get 1 victory point, because it's 0 then +1. Multiverse Batman activated next, and I think we accidentally stumbled on what makes Clayface so annoyingly effective. He wanted to just unleash Reinforced Glove after Reinforced Glove attack on the drowned. Clayface has a rule called Bodyguard, where any friendly model within range, and the range is 2 inches, he can spend 1 power and become the target of the attack instead. So, Reinforced Gloves on the drowned, 1 power spent, it hits Clayface, it does physical damage, Clayface is immune to physical damage. Spent on Reinforced Gloves again, Clayface spent another power to take the hit, he's immune to the damage. A third time, he spent another power, he's immune to the damage. So Batman was left with just, he's sitting on 1 counter, he's just gonna, or 1 power counter there. He's just going to sit still. Clayface has obviously burned through a lot of his power, but he's made sure that the drowned, who is in a little bit of danger, took no damage. And that's what he needs to do. He needs to bodyguard physical attacks, because he takes no damage from them. The drowned activated and used Dead Water on Shazam from where she was. She then moved into base to base and attacked with her trident twice. All said and done, she only did 2 damage. If you're wondering why she went after Shazam, it's because he's actually close to his pale zone, whereas Batman's basically in no danger and can still buff his defense. So Shazam is 1 away from dropping down to the pale zone now. Barry activated next, and he spent 1 to move 10 up to base with the drowned. He unleashed 2 kinetic bursts. However, Clayface spent 2 more of his power, leaving him only on to take the hits. Now they're energy, not physical, so he's not immune, so the rolls actually went through and he took 4 damage. But that spared the drowned from taking the 4 damage, which would have put her into her pale zone. Her blue zone rather, so she was at massive risk of either dying or just falling unconscious. Barry then spent his last power to bounce back to the objective. He has no power left over. So now it's down to, well, Clayface, who isn't going to have much of a turn, or the Red Death. So the Red Death saw what the Flash was doing and was like, why wasn't I doing that? So he had to spend 2 though, to go his full movement to get into base with Batman. He let out a combo strike and a kinetic burst, or a charge, whichever it is, 2 damage each. They both got through. So Batman took 4 damage, he's in his pale zone now and has to do a knockout check at the end of the turn. He then had to spend 2 more power to bounce back into range with the objective. Over to Superman to end the hero's turn, and then we'll probably quickly cover Clayface's, because there's not much he can do with 2 power. So for the final 2 activations of Battle Round 4, Superman activated this turn, he got +2 to the base damage of his Super Punch, which puts it at base damage 3. He also got +4 to his strength, but that just means he's like, his super strength is returned, so he can throw buildings again now if he wanted to. But also his Super Punch keeps the overload +3 damage stat, which is what he did, and he did a staggering 6 damage to the Merciless, putting him in the danger zone of being knocked out at the end of the round as well. Over here, Clayface just attacked with his malleable weapon once, sorry not malleable, metamorphic weapon once, actually got through and did 2 damage to Batman. we'll be back with the recap for the turn. So at the end of battle round 4, Multiverse Batman and the Merciless both failed their stamina rolls and are knocked out. They have to pass a stamina roll to wake up if they want to get an activation. The Drowned passed hers again, which is actually pretty remarkable. And this also led to a little bit of rules debate as to whether or not a knocked out model can count towards whether an objective is claimed / contested. The knocked out rule in the hardback rulebook does not say that it denies them the ability to control / contest. Coupled with that, the scenario just says models within 4 inches. It doesn't say they have to be conscious, so we've decided to play it that even a knocked out model can count as contesting / controlling for this scenario and maybe all others. So on that note, both heroes and villains, thanks to their speedster characters, claim 1 objective each, and the other is contested by, well, 2 models here and 2 on each over there. So that means nobody has the majority, so there's no bonus victory point, just 1 point each. Villains still very much way out ahead as we go into the penultimate turn, and it's going to be... oh, broke the sequence. The heroes are going first. So to get the penultimate battle round started, Shazam activated and unleashed 2 Hercules punches on the Drowned, both of which, thanks to 1 power each, was taken by Clayface. That's supernatural damage though, and he has bad supernatural defense. She has better. As it turns out though, he did make the right decision. 7 damage went through in total. Definitely hurt Clayface, would have outright killed the Drowned. So, right decision, although Clayface is obviously in a bad way now himself. The Drowned activated next and spent 1 power to back up into Multiverse Batman, who's knocked out, so he's -2 to all defenses. Then she just did 4 normal Trident attacks, didn't overload any of them. 3 of them got through though for 6 damage, so now Batman is in his blue zone and he is close to death. So for the heroes next, Multiverse Batman tried to activate, and the way it works is you just do another stamina roll, and if you pass it you get an activation with -1 power plus another power to stand up because you start knocked down. If you fail your stamina roll, which he did, you don't get a turn, and that's your turn used up. So we skipped over to the next villain turn. The Merciless tried to wake up, and he succeeded. He stood up, took 3 swings with his sword at Superman. Superman this turn has +2 power, so he's up to 10, and he has all his powers back, so he's got +2 base resistance to physical and energy? Energy, yes. So he was rocking good defense. He spent 1 to buff his physical defense, and 2 of the attacks got through still though, so that did 4. I think that puts him in his pale zone. Yep, it does, by 1 HP. Superman activated next and used a combination of 2 overloaded super punches plus his guns into the Merciless. Did 6 damage in total to him. That puts the Merciless on literally his last HP. If it had done 1 more if the guns had landed because they failed, he would have been dead, but he lived. So now it's over to the villains again. Clayface activated and he just swung with his metamorphic weapon at Batman for all the power he had left, so that was 3 attacks. Only 1 got through, but it did get the crit for 3 damage. Batman is on 2 HP remaining. The Flash activated next, also just in case I forgot to mention at the time, but when Superman hit Merciless, he got knocked down to his pale zone and did take a stamina test and passed it. The Flash bounced up to the Drowned. Clayface couldn't protect her this time. He attacked, did a total of I think 4 damage, 5 damage, leaving her on 2 HP? 3 HP. But she got into her blue zone rather. That's what I meant over there as well. Blue zone. The end of the health bar. Got to her blue zone, had to take an immediate stamina test or become knocked out. She failed it. She is knocked out. Not dead though. And we are running it that counts as contesting, so it's just the Red Death to go, and then that'll take us to the end of the turn. The Red Death activated and did another version of the exact same thing he did last turn. Spent 2 to move up to Batman, punched him, 1 got through for 2 damage, killing him, and then he zapped on back, thanks to having the agile roll, back to the objective over there. That takes us to the end of the turn. So at the end of that turn, that turned out pretty disastrously for the heroes. The villains hold 2 objectives now, the heroes hold 1, the 4th is contested, so the villains also get the point for holding the majority. There is no point continuing, the heroes literally cannot win now, so we are just going to call it there, skip turn 6 and move on to the conclusion. So that was an interesting one, Scenario 2, our second game of the DC Miniature Universe game. It was a rough one for the heroes. The villains, they had an extra pair of legs on the floor, so where the majority needed to be, it was, and that let them just peel ahead. There was still a chance Up until the start of turn 4, basically, there was actually a chance that the heroes could come back, because Croc got taken out, evening up the teams. Merciless is on... he ended on 1 HP, if Superman had just managed to do the extra 1. If the Drowned had gone down instead of Clayface bodyguarding everything off of her, that would have been 3 victory points plus the bonus for Majority, so that would have been a difference of 8 on top of what they already had, and that would have barely given them the win if my maths is correct. As it stands, there's obviously been a concede, but the scores at end of turn 5, top of turn 6, 5 victory points to the heroes and 13 to the villains. The scenario obviously helped them as well because there was no bonus kill points or anything like that. This Superman is interesting. He isn't at full power until this turn, or the turn that just ended, turn 5. So you might be thinking, like, what's the point of taking him? But the thing is, his points, or his levels, which is just like how much he costs to bring, and you have 50 in total to play with, is much lower than a standard Superman. So yes, he's kind of weak at first, but eventually he's just as strong, but you've made a saving for the cost. Like if you go by the hero list that was in the first DC match we played, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Flash, if you took this Superman, the black suit one, instead of the Batman v Superman one, you'd have enough power levels left over to bring a cheap and cheerful hero like Green Arrow. And having an extra set of legs on the floor, even if they don't do a ton of damage, it can make a difference, as you saw here. If both teams were in even 4 miniatures each, this would have been much more interesting, or much more even. Shouldn't say it isn't interesting, just because the villains had one more person. I'm surprised that Croc isn't that great in this game. He's much better in the Batman one. Clayface, on the other hand, is amazing. He could have infiltrated as well as Croc, but again, they both started where they needed to be, because the majority of the fighting happened over there, and they held their own, they survived. It was only until later in the game that things started getting a little bit dicey. The Multiverse Batman, I love the model. In this particular game, he opened with a bang, it was pretty good. He's probably better in the Batman one as well, but we'll see, because he'll be getting used at some point, now that he's ready. I'm not sure what else to say, still very fun. Shazam wasting a turn throwing the... also I didn't mean to whistle when I said his name there. Shazam throwing the building was basically a waste of one of his turns. Especially because Clayface didn't actually take any damage since it's counted as physical. If he hadn't have done that, he could have unloaded on the Drowned and taken her out a turn even earlier than it looked like she was going to go down, because Clayface wasn't close enough to bodyguard anything onto her, or off of her. So it was a mistake. Just wanted to have fun throwing a big building, but it was such a wide building and you have to go by the width of the thing you're throwing. It caught too many things, so the massive damage it could have done 7 damage. It had to be distributed amongst everything hit, even if you only do like 1, 1, 1, 1, 4 or 3. So it's interesting. There wasn't as much flinging of scenery, but also that's the other bad thing about the Superman, I guess. He isn't strong enough to throw anything large until turn 5 or 4. Still, I hope you enjoyed. Please do continue showing your support if you wish to see more DC miniature game battle reports in the future. We're still kind of testing the waters with them compared to Batman. Batman's more tactically involved, more rules, more depth. This is fun though. We'll see what happens next time when we go into scenario 3. Thank you for watching, and ta-ta for now.